They're told to be quiet.
We are back on the air, as they say. Good morning. This is the second half of the morning for the Senate Natural Resources and Energy Committee. We are resuming work on Bill H-158, an act relating to the beverage container redemption system, aka the bottle bill. So with that, I'd like to first invite to join us once again, a regular visitor, Ms. Crosby. Morning.
Morning. Thank you for having me. So for the record, my name is Kim Crosby. I'm the Director of Environmental Compliance. I'm going on my 15th year with Casella. I'm part of Casella's engineering and compliance team that consists of around 20 engineers and environmental analysts that are positioned throughout our operating footprint, which covers Vermont, New Hampshire, Maine, Massachusetts, Connecticut, New York, and Pennsylvania. I have a degree in environmental science from Northern University. I've been employed by the state of New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services, the Vermont Department of Environmental Conservation, and I formerly managed the hazardous waste program for Dartmouth-Hitchcock Medical Center before I came to Casella in 2008. Casella is headquartered in Rutland, Vermont, and has been providing solid waste and recycling services in Vermont since 1975. And we employ 670 Vermonters. Casella operates the state's only operating landfill. We provide curbside waste and recycling services to approximately 63,000 residential and commercial customers. In addition to curbside services, we collect waste and recycling at 17 drop-off facilities that are located throughout Vermont. We also operate a packaging facility in Williston and a certified compost facility in Bennington.
Sorry, quick question. You always have good detailed testimony with facts and figures. Are you submitting a written?
I'll send it to Jude after. It just has my notes on here that I want to clean up before I
Yeah, sure. Okay,
send it
thank
in.
you.
So Casella operates the materials recycling facility, or MRF, in Williston through an operating contract with Chittenden County Solid Waste District. CSWD owns the building, they own the equipment, and they set their tip fee. They also test and market their recycled glass, which they crush to make processed glass aggregate. So Casella employees, including 8 that are from the Vermont Refugee Program, process the material that's brought into the facility, and we assist CSWD with marketing their materials, and we receive a share of the revenue from the sale of those said materials. So I'll stop for a minute if there's any questions about our relationship with CSWD. I know Jen was in here last Friday and there was some conversation about it.
So you get, I think I understand this, but as far as glass sales, after it's been crushed and it's an aggregate, you all get a portion of the profits from that sale.
We do not. Glass is the exception, but we do not. We only process it. We don't have anything to do outside of that.
So not the glass.
Not the glass.
Okay.
It's everything else.
Everything else. Okay,
Yep.
great. All right, thank you.
So in addition to the recycling facility in Williston, Casella owns and operates the recycling facility in Rutland. A majority of the incoming material we receive is mixed paper. 3 to 4% of incoming material is PET and aluminum. In 2022, the facility processed approximately 38,000 tons of recycling. Of that 38,000 tons, we sent 659 tons of PET to processors. Half of that was made into beverage containers. We sent 231 tons of aluminum cans to be made into new containers, beverage containers. At our Rutland facility, we do not crush glass into an aggregate, we break it into a cullet. And in 2022, we sent approximately 4,975 tons of glass to a bottle-to-bottle facility in North Carolina. 90% of the glass that we send to this facility is made into bottles, and the remaining 10% is used to make fiberglass. So these are the same markets that the bottle bill is currently using. Our recycling facility in Rutland is located next to the Vermont rail system, which allows us to economically transport glass to North Carolina We send one rail car a week, and each rail car carries about 100 tons of glass. And I say it's economically because it's economically better to rail it than it is to transport it via tractor trailer truck.
Did you say it's 100 tons?
100 tons per rail car, yep. So this is the first time I've been in this committee this year, but I have been monitoring some of the legislation that you guys have been discussing, and particularly the Portable Heat Act, and I can certainly appreciate and empathize when information gets out there that is incorrect.
Thank you.
And I know how frustrating that can be.
We did experience a little bit.
Yeah. So I'd like, if I may, to take some time to address some of the misstatements I've heard about this particular bill. And the testimony I've heard from other entities that are supportive of expanding bottle bills. I've heard that material collected through a redemption program is cleaner than material collected through single stream, that material in single stream cannot be recycled into the same products. It's highly contaminated, which is what led to China's implementation of the National Sword Program, and that a majority of what people are putting in their blue bins is not getting recycled. And recycling facilities will see a cost savings from glass being removed from the system. There's lots to unravel here. So first, I cannot argue that glass is cleaner when it's collected through a redemption program or other separate collection system. However, the contamination that is in recycled glass does not prohibit glass from being recycled into glass bottles. Second, we have done an evaluation at our Rutland facility to determine if we would see some sort of cost savings if more glass was removed from single stream to the bottle bill. And based on our evaluation, removing some of the glass would not result in savings for us. We get paid to process glass through the tip fee, and we get paid from Strategic for the glass that we send them. While our transportation costs to get the glass to North Carolina versus what Strategic pays us may be a wash, we still generate revenue from glass through the tip fee at the front end of the process. Even by removing wine bottles doesn't mean that we would not still receive them with other types of glass that would still need to be processed.
Sorry, who's Strategic?
It's a bottle-to-bottle facility in North Carolina that we're sending glass to.
Perfect, thank you.
Yep. We still have to run the equipment, still have to turn on the lights, we still have to have the employees run the facility and manage the glass. And now we have the same operating costs with less material to receive and process to cover those costs. So whether glass is collected through single stream, the bottle bill system, or other separate collection system, glass is expensive to transport because of its weight. The Northeast Kingdom Solid Waste District collects glass separately, and therefore it should be clean. However, they have testified that even though it is clean, they still have to pay to get rid of it. The Northeast Kingdom Solid Waste District also testified that they would not see an increase in the cost of recycling at their facilities. While that may be true for the member towns that use their facilities, which are basically drop-offs, haulers who provide curbside collection in that area do not use that facility, and therefore they would see an increase. They also do not manage solid waste and recycling for all of the towns that are members of the district, nor is every town in the Northeast a member of the district. So again, whether glass is collected through single stream, bottle bill, separate, glass is expensive to transport because it's heavy. The cost involved with transporting glass and lack of available markets for recycled glass in the Northeast is why we continue to support the use of glass in construction projects. Glass can be used as a substitute for virgin sand. It can be produced into a foam glass aggregate. It can also be used as a substitute for fly ash in the production of concrete. This creates a stronger and longer lasting concrete while reducing carbon dioxide emissions generated from the production of cement on an almost ton per ton basis. It was reported through research conducted by the Oregon Department of Environmental Quality that the use of recycled glass into concrete is 5 times more impactful from a climate perspective than going back to bottles or fiberglass. So,
do you know if that market exists in Vermont, or is
it's not in Vermont,
in
it's
this
just
way?
urban mining in Connecticut is making that material, and they call it positive. It's a pozzolan. I think Nick can expand on that one. Yeah. But we have a recycling facility in Connecticut that we're sending some of the material to that. facility for that purpose.
Yeah. Is it, so just a curiosity question, is the stream that you sent from Rutland to North Carolina, is that a better market for your glass, or they're looking for something different in Connecticut in this?
It's a better market. Again, it's the cost of transporting it there that comes into, that weighs into the cost of recycling it to get it there.
Sure.
Yeah.
I
I know Chipman's starting to bring some glass there. And I think, that's great. But I'm sure they're gonna experience some increase in cost in the transportation to get it there. Because it's heavy, you can only fit so much on a tractor trailer. There's weight limits on roads.
Sure. Okay. So the Connecticut facility you're talking about related to cement, it's not on that rail side.
It's not, yeah, not that I'm aware of. It'd be great if it was. Not to say that it couldn't be at some point. So regarding the cleanliness of other materials such as PET and aluminum, Casella recycling facilities process recyclables according to the guidelines outlined in the Institute of Scrap Recycling Industries recycling specifications. These specifications are derived from many sectors of the metals, paper, plastics, and glass industries, and were developed to represent the quality and composition of the materials bought and sold in the recycling industry. In addition to these guidelines, the cleaner the material, the more valuable it is. With Casella being a publicly traded company, we are incentivized and have a responsibility to our shareholders and investors to produce higher quality material to obtain the most value. I'd like to address what led to the implementation of the China's National Sword Program, because I think there's been a lot of confusion around that in particular. So prior to 2018, China was the largest buyer of mixed paper in the world. Recycled mixed paper was exported to China from the United States and other countries for decades. Unlike Casella, there were recycling facilities that were not producing baled material to the specifications and the guidelines I just mentioned. Many bales of mixed paper exported to China contained contamination rates north of 25%. This was not the case for baled paper being produced and exported by Casella. Our bales were meeting the industry standard of less than 3%. Initially, China lowered the contamination rate from 3% to less than 1%. We upgraded our equipment and hired additional sorters to meet this new standard. However, if our baled material was being exported on the same barge with material that did not meet the standard of less than 1, China rejects the entire load. So the risk to continue to export was too high, and eventually China ended up banning imports of mixed paper altogether. So from our perspective, the National Sword Program was not implemented because Casella was sending them garbage, nor did the program involve aluminum and PET bales from our facilities. These materials are managed within the United States and Canada and are again sold to the same markets that the bottle bill is using. So regarding the statement that most of what people are placing in the recycling bins is not being recycled. The material that is not being recycled from recycling bins is material that people are putting in the recycling bins that they think can be recycled, but it cannot be processed for recycling at single stream facilities. Examples include clothes, plastic bags, bowling balls, 75-foot garden hoses that we pulled off the line, CD cases, juice cartons, and the list goes on. But the list does not include mandated recyclables. Before and since the passage of the Universal Recycling Law, Casella has continued to invest in Vermont's recycling infrastructure to ensure that mandated recyclables are being recycled. We've invested millions of dollars to upgrade our facilities to install technology to improve sortation and the cleanliness of recyclables. Most recently, we invested $1.4 million in the installation of robotics at our facility in Rutland to improve sortation, capture more recyclable material, and compensate for the lack of available labor. Also worth noting, in December of 2022, we invested in successfully secured grant funding to purchase the first electric garbage truck in Vermont.
Yeah.
The truck is operating in the Rutland area and is equipped for collecting waste and recycling simultaneously. By switching one truck from diesel to electric, we expect to conserve over 7,500 gallons of diesel fuel a year, eliminate over 78 metric tons of greenhouse gas emissions a year, which is equivalent to taking around 16 passenger vehicles off the road. So that, again, that vehicle is being piloted in the Rutland area. Took a long time to get the car, the truck.
I'm sure.
Took a long time. We're supposed to get two, but we only got one. Earlier I spoke of recycling PET and aluminum. Although these materials represent a small portion of the overall material we receive, they are the most valuable material that we produce, and their value helps offset the cost of recycling of other materials when markets are most volatile, like for mixed paper, which again is a majority of the incoming material we receive. So mixed paper makes up about 40% of the incoming volume. When recycling facilities lose more of the valuable materials to the bottle bill system, they must raise their fees in order to make up for the loss in revenue. We've determined that the cost of recycling could increase to all Vermonters by approximately 7%, which equates to about $10 more a ton to our current tip fee. The exact amount of the increase to Vermonters is difficult to predict because the value of recyclable commodities changes every single month. Every single month we get updates on what the current values are for commodities. So from October to March, mixed paper was going at $0 per ton. So in that case, it would be a huge impact for us. So while a 7% increase, now it's up to $10, which isn't still good, but it's better than nothing. While a 7% increase may equate to only a few dollars more at the household level and may seem insignificant to some, a few dollars more is in addition to all of the other increases households are experiencing due to inflation. It's also not insignificant to those that generate large amounts of recycling, like businesses, schools, hospitals, apartments, and state-owned buildings. So Vermont has a statewide goal to reduce the disposal of solid waste and increase the statewide diversion rate to 50% by 2024. The state's current diversion rate has been hovering around 34%. Prior testimony from DSM, who prepared the 2013 systems analysis and the 2018 waste characterization study for the agency, shows that an expanded bottle bill would result in a maximum reduction of landfilled waste in Vermont of 1% and would increase bottle bill operational costs by an additional $4 million a year. The data in the report shows that beverage containers, regardless of whether they are covered in the bottle bill, are recycled at a very high rate, and expanding the bottle bill would only have a minuscule effect on the overall diversion rate. The agency has also previously testified that the materials are either being recycled through one system or the other. So according to the agency's 2021 diversion report, single-use products and non-recyclable packaging make up 30% of the waste stream disposed of in Vermont. Instead of focusing on trying to capture a small percentage of material, we should be turning our focus to address 30% of the material that is currently not recyclable and is impacting our recycling systems and consuming capacity at landfills. Encouraging legislation that will require manufacturers to use recycled content to produce their products increases the demand for recycled materials and helps to eliminate the volatility of the commodities markets that often drive up the cost of recycling. In addition to recycled content, requiring manufacturers to package their products in packaging that can be recycled versus packaging that cannot is a path forward towards reducing the amount of non-recyclable packaging. In addition to reducing the amount of non-recyclable packaging, more work needs to be done to eliminate PFAS in food packaging and other products at both federal and state levels on an aggressive timeline and to the greatest extent possible. So in closing, we urge the committee to continue to support Vermont's recycling infrastructure by not voting to expand the bottle bill system, at least until the results of the systems analysis that's in the bill as proposed in 158 has been received and evaluated. We should be working together to focus on ways to address the 30% of materials that are not recyclable instead of focusing on materials that already are.
Any committee
Question.
questions?
Okay,
from
Yeah,
Mr.
done.
I was wondering why you were laughing.
Oh. I thought you were looking at me like, is there anything
Oh,
else you
no,
wanted to
I'm
say?
sorry, no, I've got it. I know, I think.
Oh, okay.
Sarah White.
Thank you, Chair Bray, and apologies for arriving late. Thank you so much for the work that you do at Casella, and I know that, Senator McCormick and I, we have a very large operating facility of yours in our district, so we really do appreciate that work. So I had asked Jen Holiday from the Chittenden Solid Waste District to give us some numbers around the tipping fee increase and how she's calculating that. I haven't received that yet, and you had reminded me with your testimony that I did want that information, so I'm gonna shoot Jude a note about it, because I don't have her email address. But I'm wondering if you have that for how your increased tipping fees would look. If you've got like a Excel or something that you're looking at, because
Yeah.
we had received kind of two different numbers between the House and the Senate for her, so.
So I think she initially calculated what it would be $10, which was the same number that we came up with, but I think she's including, because they pay us an operating fee to process their material, and that operating fee is on a per ton basis. So I think what she did was
They say
factor
8 to
in,
16 per
yeah,
ton.
I think she's factoring in that we might raise our costs to
Yes.
them if we have less material to process, but we have the same operating costs, which could likely be the case.
And do you have like a spreadsheet or something that shows?
So we have a
that?
whole financial department of controllers that manage our finances, and it is an elaborate spreadsheet. And it's based on our data, and I appreciate others that, refer to national data, but it's based on our data. I'm not a financial person, so I rely on them to run the numbers, and that's the latest number that they ran and came up with.
Could we see how they come to that calculation, just like the factors? Is that a possibility? Because it's hard it's hard to wrap our heads around where the increase is coming.
So the increase comes because we're losing the valuable material.
No, I understand that. It seems like we've gotten different numbers, and I'm just trying to understand what the equation is that you're using.
So there is no specific formula to calculate how much material you're gonna actually lose. You have to it's all based on assumptions in a spreadsheet.
Okay.
And it's based on what the commodity value is at that time that they're running those numbers, which changes, like I said, on a monthly basis.
Could we
So
see like last month's or something then?
it was done for the beginning of this year.
Are we able to see that?
I can show that to you. I don't know. I can't guarantee that you're gonna understand it.
That's fine.
Because I had to have it explained to me.
Yeah.
So,
Because that seems to be the crux of the argument against the bottle bill from the perspective of folks in the waste system, is that it's gonna have this major increase. But I'm trying to understand that argument with fluctuating numbers and a lack of how you're coming to it. So to see something on paper and how you're calculating it would be really helpful for me to understand the argument. So I'll send Jen a note, but if you have that, so we can understand how it factors into their calculations with their expected increased costs that you'll be putting forward if
So
you see this happen.
we haven't had that conversation with CSW yet, and it wouldn't be appropriate to until this comes to fruition to say that we're under an operating contract with them.
Oh, I thought you would I misunderstood her testimony then. I thought there had been a conversation with her increased tipping fee numbers being based
I
on.
think she's assuming, she's doing some assumptions that we would probably increase our fees to them because there's less volume to produce essentially, but our operating costs are gonna stay the same. And if we get paid per ton,
Yes.
then we would increase our costs to them, is what she's assuming.
Yes, so my question is, could I understand how maybe the answer is you can't do it yet, is what I'm hearing, so. Perhaps
We can make assumptions to come up with a rough number, which is the 7%, which equates to the $10 additional per ton. So CSWD sets their tip fee.
Mhm.
We set ours in Rutland, and ours fluctuates with the commodities market. Theirs stays constant. So sometimes our tip fee is lower than theirs, and sometimes it's higher, depending upon what's going on in the commodities market. The commodities markets are almost like the stock market.
Yeah.
They go up and down all the time, and so plastic, the value of plastic fluctuates with the price of oil. If the price of oil is lower, manufacturers will use virgin oil to make their product and not recycled materials. This is why we're trying to drive the recycled content requirements.
So would you
Okay.
support a recycled content requirement? Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
Shades of the packaging work group from 5 summers ago.
Yeah.
So still have that issue. Okay.
Yeah.
Senator Watson.
Thank you. So we've heard from other testimony that there's a possibility that in other places anyway that have this kind of system, that curbside folks who do pickup may be able to take advantage of picking up redeemables. Is that something that you all have considered? I understand that you like couldn't say like, yeah, we're definitely
Yeah.
gonna do that, but you know, is that on your radar?
You know, we have invested a lot in curbside single stream recycling, a lot. And we did it because the universal recycling law passed and we went all in.
Yeah.
So to change the landscape on us by taking some of that material out into a different system is very challenging for us, as you can imagine. And it makes it really hard and difficult to anticipate investing further in other types of systems. I don't know, I'm not a business orientated person, but I don't know how that would work. It would be great if it could be included in the blue bin, but I don't know why then you would even have it be separate if you were putting it in the blue bins, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So there would have to be a way to, get people their money back. And that could be challenging. I think that's probably the most challenging piece of doing it curbside. Is how the money flows, the handling fee and all of that.
Right.
And I think that's really something that the PRO will be focused on, the way that I'm reading this bill, that they're gonna be responsible for kind of revamping the current system to make it most efficient and more cost effective. So,
Great. And I think the PRO's solutions I think there'll be a lot of things that will be figured out and offered, and part of the hope is that it becomes a marketplace where some people participate because they see it as a business opportunity, serving the need. Anything else?
No.
Any other questions from Ms. Crosby?
little plug, if I may, for, we are, the TerraCycle project. So we're the first solid waste company to collaborate with a company like TerraCycle. We're doing it in Burlington. We're offering these bags for hard to recycle items that don't typically go through single stream. And we're collecting them and sending them to this facility in New Jersey that I've been to, and you can't believe the amount of hand sorting that they're doing. They're collecting everything from dental floss picks to hard hats to ear things. I mean, the amount of gaylords, it was unreal. Dental floss, makeup.
I thought that was all Robbins.
No, it's pretty impressive. But you know, again, the attempt to get more stuff out of the landfill. So
While we're talking about challenging materials, how about sheet plastic?
yeah.
Is that something that still is kind of a troubling material for you? Because, like, for instance, it jams up MRFs. And,
It does. Yeah.
What people are separating out sheet plastic and recycling it differently.
Well, I think there's some confusion about what can be recycled and what belongs in your blue bin, right? So your blue bin is for your basic traditional mandated recyclables. Clothes can be recycled or brought to us, one of those drop-off bins and reused, but they can't be put in your blue bin, right? The grocery stores used to have the separate collection programs for the grocery bags and the film wrap that goes around your paper towels. It can be recycled through that system, but not through ours because of the equipment can't handle it.
Well, it seems like blue bins get a lot of,
Yeah,
it's a target
sink.
for wishful recycling.
that's exactly what we call it, yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
Wishful recycling.
Wishful recycling.
I always thought it was blue bin or the garbage.
Well, they say when in doubt, throw it out, right?
Yeah,
But people, people think used tissues can be recycled in your blue bin.
This is paper.
Yeah. And that's not the kind of paper that we can recycle anyway. It's, there's a certain list. We hand out brochures to all of our customers, pictures, what can and cannot go in, yeah. But
What about this? Say, what about this?
no,
No, that's what I thought. That's what I thought. I have been scolded for throwing one of these out.
yeah, no,
coated paper.
yeah. So,
Right, great. Well, good to see you again. Thanks.
thank you for having me.
Again, and,
Appreciate the time.
If you can, once you have your notes cleaned up, if you could send
I
them
can step aside
to
and do that right
Ms.
now.
Newman, that'd be great, because you did have a lot of facts and figures. With that, I'd like to go to Mr. Vandenberg from Agency of Transportation.
Thank you.
Morning, thanks for coming over. I think maybe it's this first time in this committee, or at least this session. So we're curious about glass and AOT, because it seems like this has been a conversation that's been going on for years. We know, just checking in to see where we're at in terms of providing a home for processed glass aggregate.
Thank you for having me, and I do have a presentation that you all have in your hands, but I can share a screen if you'd like to. So again, thank you for having me. My name is Nick Vandenberg, and I work for the Vermont Agency of Transportation. Excuse me. I lead our materials testing and certification section within the Construction and Materials Bureau. I also chair our Recycled Materials Working Group, which is a project with Agency of Natural Resources and VTRAN, who work together to try to find homes for recycled materials in agency projects. So a little background, and I won't belabor this because I'm sure you've heard it all before, but EPA estimates 11.4 million tons of glass was generated in 2017, of which about 3 million tons was recycled, 7 million tons was landfilled. And of course, the universal recycling law drives a lot of glass material into the recycling system, which, as you heard from our in-state glass generators, it makes a challenge for them to find a place to put it. And so from VTRAN's perspective, we've long been a proponent of the use of processed glass aggregate in our highway construction projects. In fact, it's been allowed in our standard specifications for construction since as far back as 1995. It's been in there. And also the use of PGA in highway construction applications is standardized in the AASHTO standard M318. That's the American Association of State Highway Transportation Officials. So the use of crushed glass in highway construction has been standardized by national standards bodies. And in the figure here, you can see just close up photo of some processed glass aggregate.
I can probably stay patient, but I'll let me. The big question I have is, previous years we've heard that the specification somehow, for instance, Chittenden Solid Waste District was creating processed glass aggregate, but it wasn't maybe yet to spec for use by VTRANS. Is that? And so, and my understanding was that for several years running that things were under discussion, et cetera, to like change the processing, or there's another application that's going to be less demanding in terms of specs. Can you give us the the big picture? in terms
Yeah,
of-
absolutely. And I do have some content on that specifically on the work we're doing with CSWD with regard to process glass aggregate. So I'll just jump right to that if you don't want to hear the rest of it.
No, that's fine. Since you're gonna get there, we might as well.
Okay.
We might as
I'll
well
go
learn,
through
we
these.
might as well learn as much as we can while you're here.
Sure, well, that's what I'm here for, is just education more than anything else. So a couple other applications where we can use recycled glass in highway construction, so you see on the screen, foam glass aggregate, as you may be aware, there's a facility now in Essex, Vermont that produces that material. We have plans to use it on a bridge project in Reedsboro, and we are using it on the Colchester Exit 17 project as a lightweight backfill material and a geotechnical application. Also, as you, I believe, heard earlier during today's testimony, that ground glass pozzolan is another material where we can take recycled glass and turn it into something useful. V-Trans standard specification has been updated, so we allow this. There's again, a nationally recognized standard, that ASTM-C 1866, that sets the performance requirements for that ground glass pozzolan. And so Vermont concrete producers have that in their toolbox, so to speak. They can use that material and meet our specifications.
Is that turning out to be cost effective, or is it a premium product?
That would be a good question for the concrete producers, but I will say that that was a fairly recent addition, as noted there in 2022, so I don't believe it's made it into any of our concrete mix designs yet. But again, it's sort of an arrow in the quiver, if you will. And last but not least, process glass aggregate. So with regard to your question earlier about sort of what the agency has been doing with regard to process glass aggregate, so a couple of things. In the last year, 2 years, we updated our specifications to expand how much processed glass aggregate can be mixed in. So back to 1995, the way our specification read was that we would allow up to 10% processed glass aggregate to be mixed in with a sub-base material. And so in a recent spec change in the last 2 years, we doubled that to say, okay, we can put in the 20% processed glass aggregate into that sub-base material. And along with that, we have initiated a research project with UVM through the Transportation Infrastructure Durability Center, which is at the University of Maine, with the primary objective being to determine the engineering properties of incorporating processed glass aggregate as a sandbar replacement. So that is particularly interesting because sandbar is very difficult to find in the natural sort of pits. So aggregate producers are being forced more and more to manufacture sand by taking big rocks and crushing them down into sand, which obviously is very energy intensive and not environmentally.
Yeah, can you fill us in on that term sandbar, what that means? Like,
So essentially that's a free draining material that we would use to put below the sub-base layer. It needs to be free draining and sort of in that way it's frost resistant, but it's one of the layers we would typically use in constructing the roadway.
yeah. And you were saying base, or I don't know if it's base, sub-base.
Sub-base, yeah.
The PGA going into that. So what's its job? It's a stable material that doesn't break down, that it drains, but what is it doing out there, and why is it have to be to a specification?
Sure. So I'll preface this by saying, if there's any geotechnical experts listening, they're going to poke holes in some of what I have to say. So that's not my strongest suit, but essentially it's supporting a roadway, we'll say, for an example. And so it needs to have the structural strength to sort of not move when loads are being applied across the top of the roadway, as well as being resistant to sort of movement due to frost and other forces. So that's where the free draining component comes in. We get the water out and then we can avoid sort of freeze thaw effects.
Senator Watson?
I just want to make sure that I'm clear about the word that you're using, because I heard manufactured sand basically, and then sandbars, which I was like,
Sandbar.
so how do you spell that?
B-O-R-R-O-W.
Oh, okay, so it is just like borrow. Okay,
Yeah.
so because I want to make sure, like these are some new chemical, physical ideas for me. So it's very interesting. So
Yeah.
thank you.
Of course. So I can jump to the next slide here. So to sort of put things, I guess, in perspective of the potential for the agency to use processed glass aggregate. So these figures are showing the cumulative use of sandbar and sub-base on agency projects from the period of 2016 to 2021. And so to sort of walk through the table here, in our current specifications, all those ones that have sub-base at the beginning are allowed to have PGA in them today. And so if we add those up, we've got roughly 350,000 cubic yards of material. And that equates to, it's approximately 1.5 tons per yard. And so if we do the math there and say 20% of that total divided by the 5 years, essentially it boils down to annually, the agency could consume approximately 14,000 cubic yards of processed glass aggregate across our project statewide. And that's not using it for sandbar at all, because currently our specifications don't allow that, but that's where that project with UVM is, we're gonna open that door.
And is it up to individual contractors whether or not they bid using PGA or not? I mean, do you ever ask to have it included in the project in order to basically help create a market for the material, or are you, does the state feel obligated to drive on cost alone, but they're trying to have the most economical and functional way of doing it? If that doesn't include PGA, then it doesn't include PGA.
So I would answer that by saying that, so with regard, the recycled materials working group that I'm part of, so it's V-Trans, A&R, and then our industry partners. So essentially what we're trying to do is balance what we call the 3 E's, the engineering, the environmental, and the economics part of it. So really, from my seat with V-Trans, we're really focused on the engineering aspect. So if we can clear the engineering hurdle, we rely on our partners at A&R to sort of clear the environmental stewardship hurdle. And then we look to industry to really determine, is it economically viable, and to let us know when it's not, and what else we can do to sort of remove barriers and risk for them to use these materials.
Yeah, we've talked about other recycled content provisions in packaging, for instance, as a way of helping create a market so that those materials have a useful home when they get recycled, and it helps stabilize the market, create a market. I don't know to what degree V-Trans is big enough that if you made a policy choice, for instance, to say we're going to use 10% of our total sub base is going to be PGA going forward. If you help create a market, drive a market, find a home for that material, is anyone trying to figure that out on behalf of the state of Vermont?
I would say, I'm certain that folks are. I'll say for my piece that I don't dabble in the policy end too much. I'm really in the engineering side of things.
Yeah.
But certainly that's a question that I could bring up the chain that would be an answer back there.
Any questions for Mr. Van Berg? You're right.
Thank you, Mayor Bray. Thank you so much for coming. And I, former transportation house member, so I always love this conversation. I know that you're here to talk to us specifically about glass, but there are other, types of recyclable materials that have been used for kind of added to a mix, is my understanding. I'm wondering if that has been explored.
Yeah, certainly we are frequently talking about different materials, recycled materials that are could potentially be used in a variety of applications. And again, this is where the recycled materials working group really focuses, is basically all those sort of ideas or concepts that we heard this here, we saw this there,
Yeah.
it all goes to that working group, and when we break it apart. And I have a whole actually testimony prepared for Senator Trans that goes just into what we're doing with recycled materials working group.
Nice.
But essentially, we're again following a national standard. That's a national standard that says, here's the sort of protocol that you use to balance all the risks, answer all the questions about, each new combination of recycled material and particular application in transportation. Because obviously glass in an unbound aggregate is different than glass in concrete, is different than glass in asphalt or wherever else you might choose to use it.
Yeah.
But yes, to answer your question in short, we look at all of those and again, try to answer those 3 E's for each combination.
That is exciting. I mean, we're pretty, I don't want to toot your horn too much, but our V-Trans folks are way ahead of the curve compared to some other states. When we look at some of this work, it's pretty incredible. Thank you.
I'm sure you were on transportation.
I don't know if you heard about that, but never mind.
Well, this has gotten into some exciting nerdish topics.
It's just cool. It's
Finding
exciting.
homes for recycled materials is definitely part of it. Senator McCormick.
I'm gonna ask a real layman's question. I always thought of crushed ground glass as something that was the individual pieces were still sharp.
So there are specifications we require that it's at least smaller than 3/8 of an inch nominal maximum size, but the material that we're looking at, in particular for like a sand borrow project, it's crushed down to very small, essentially like a coarse sand size, and you can pick it up in your hand and it doesn't cut because it's been crushed so small. And I'm not the expert on that, you are, but
Looks like sand.
yeah. And so honestly, that as far as all the recycled materials and highway applications that V-Trans looks at, this one's pretty promising because it's an easy win, so to speak. There's not a lot that would need to be done to use it in those applications.
Does the PGA specification include a contamination level?
It does.
In your first slide showed there's some plastic or some paper get in it. So I'm guessing that has to be relatively modest because you're looking for something stable, not something that's going to break down.
Right, and so yes, it does. That Ashland standard has limits there, and then beyond that, within V-Trans specifications, we've added a few other sort of additional limitations for deleterious content. And I'll note too that project with UVM and TIDC, that's one of the areas that they're really focusing on is to determine, for sand borrow, for example, what are the engineering limits at which too much deleterious content impacts the engineering properties, as well as they're actually developing a new test method to quickly and accurately determine those deleterious material contents. Some of the existing methods involve like hand sorting and, very impractical to do on a large scale. So we're excited for that research project.
And how about that material is used for sanding roads in winter?
To my knowledge, it's not being used in that application. Not to say that it couldn't, it's not one that I've looked into, but that could be something that the working group could get into next.
Well, it would seem like the nightmarish part of it would be if you had microplastics in the aggregate, and now we would start spreading microplastics around, which is one of the things that is happening, and we're trying to avoid.
Well, and to your point, honestly, that's where, again, it's sort of balancing those 3 E's, that environmental part. It's like, we don't want to do more harm in the interest of trying to do good, right? So that's why we really strive to answer all those questions up front before we implement something.
Anything that you wanted to get to that you haven't got to yet?
No, it was just more facts and figures and sort of numbers, but I'm happy to share all the notes. I didn't send them in the copy that you have now, but I can certainly forward those along.
Sure, that'd be great. We have a committee of data thirsty people.
Perfect.
So, okay, great. Thanks so much for coming in.
Of course, thank you.
We will ask Mr. Grenier to join us. Jeremy Grenier. Am I pronouncing your last name correctly? Say Grenier?
Grenier.
Grenier.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Or if you're a candidate, it's Grenier. Well, thank you for having me and taking the time to listen. I will actually applaud Casella on their single stream. I live in Graniteville, and frankly, I love it. It works very easy. So I have a beer and wine wholesale distribution company up in Berlin, Calmont Beverage, and I'm also here representing the Vermont Wholesale Distributors. And would you like a copy of what I'm going to speak about?
Sure.
I did make them for you.
Great, thank you. The other thing too is, I don't know if you've sent them to our committee as Newman. If you do that, then
I will do that.
we can post them, and then folks who are looking online will be able to pull up the record.
Do you have enough to give out to?
Here we go.
This is just,
We've
this
got
is
a
a
same thing.
different. Oh, you really did come prepared.
I did.
Right, you win the prize this year for coming with most prepared with handouts. Usually,
All right.
we're lucky if we get everyone gets one
Yeah.
at the table.
So before this meeting, what I did was actually contact people in Maine, because as you know, that they have a bottle law similar to what you're proposing. So when I spoke to them, I actually mentioned that I wasn't as interested in the challenges that it made for us as distributors, but the challenges that it actually made for the community. for the people that actually have to bring their empties somewheres and to deal with this new law. And these, half of what I'm going to speak to you is about Maine. They've had their law in effect with wine bottles for 8 years, and it's still proven to be quite challenging up there, and it had some very interesting side effects that I think you all should know about. So that has a lot of what I'm going to talk to you about today. All right. So
let me pause and ask a question. So I'm
Sure.
guessing you've looked pretty closely at H158 as it came out of the House. And I don't know, we talked about Maine in here last year. So if you can highlight where you think, oh, here's a problem in Maine, and you still see it in H158, that will be helpful too.
okay.
I mean, because I think the target was to learn from Maine and address those shortcomings in the system.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's it's great to hear you say that. So, one of the things that, Vermont restaurants will have is a lot of your restaurants are in like mall complexes. McGillicuddy's in Colchester is in, the complex there, right where Shaw's or Hannaford's is. And I actually have to deliver there twice a week because he has no room for backup inventory. He had no place to store all these bottles of wine. Also he does business with several different companies who carry his wine. And if he were to have to keep all these empties, having the room to deal with several distributors would be very difficult. So that could eliminate competition in the way that, he could just choose one distributor and say, well, I don't have room to do business with more than one distributor, eliminating business. This has happened up in Maine with things because where there's stickers, it says the name of the distributor on each sticker. That's part of how they sort it. So it really has been very anti-competitive, and where the Anheuser-Busch distributor generally has the upper hand because most places feel they have to have Anheuser-Busch products, meaning Budweiser. And so it's easier just to give the Budweiser guy all the business than to deal with the sorting. And that makes it very difficult for people like myself, Vermont Wine Merchants, 802, Artisanal, where what we specialize in is very small wineries and things like that. Another issue, the
Can I
restaurant.
ask a quick question?
Yes,
Do you have any Vermont vineyards in your portfolio?
I used to. I have Fresh Tracks Farm.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and Christine was great to deal with. It's unfortunate that she closed, but after that, I don't currently have one.
They're done.
Yeah, she closed up. Yeah, we just sold the last of her inventory in probably the end of January. Yeah, it was shocking. She's even pulled up all of her vines and everything. Yeah. Training restaurant staff to separate their products by distributor. So when my drivers show up and they have to pick up their empties and then they get there and then everything is not mixed the way they're supposed to with the staffing shortages. And even when staffing was good, back in the day when beer had to be separated by distributor, it didn't happen. Just training people is difficult and they're tired at the end of their shift and they're just like the heck with it. So when the drivers show up, it's not sorted right, so they just don't take it. So then again, this product is still just sitting there. That's been a big issue for restaurateurs. After 8 years of having deposits on wine bottles, only 30% of the suppliers have changed to actually putting 15% name deposit on their bottles. The other 70% of their suppliers have to be manually stickered. That is a massive challenge. Stickers fall off. And it's been very problematic, and even after 8 years, it's still a problem. Maine had to limit the number of redemption centers to make pickups of returnables possible. With their expansion, a bunch more redemption centers opened up, said, well, here's a chance for business. Well, with a company like Tomra was like, no, we can't suddenly go from having 100 stops in the state of Maine to 200 stops. We can't do that. And so they petitioned, and they actually have a certain number of redemption centers that are allowed in the state to keep that efficiency. So that would also be extremely important. As you've heard, or hope you've heard on many different conversations, Tomra is struggling with our current redemption system. And they're having a very hard time keeping up with pickups just as they are. Forget about doubling it and doubling it overnight. And so, you know, I really caution to that because our whole commingling system is dependent on a hired company to come around and pick up all of our empties. If TOMRA were to pull out, then we would have to go back to distributors and get rid of the commingling system and have to go Baker, Farrell, Calmont, and all the empties would have to be picked up individually, which again, then everybody, redemption centers and restaurants all have to separate everything. It's not a simple system. We work very hard to develop the commingling.
Sure, and there's, as you know, the commingling penalty or premium is increased in the bill. Instead of 3.5, 4 cents, now it's 3.5, 5 cents. So more expensive to choose not to be commingled, with the hopes of driving more people into the commingled stream.
We hope to. We obviously would like to see language that would get everybody to do business in the state of Vermont. You have to be a part of commingling. That would have been a lot better, or excuse me, the more preferable.
Yeah. Well, and the PRO is, it's a pretty long runway in 2027. And my hope, we've talked about it. It's a little cute, but I think it is the overarching goal that we'd like to see redeeming a bottle be as easy as buying it in the first place.
Mhm.
And how we get there is part of what the PRO will figure out over time. And we're also seeing that with new technologies that will get introduced more and more, that will be more automated sorting, help improve the sorting, make it more economical, and then have ways that, for the most part, might eliminate all that backroom sorting at some of the stops you have, where everything would be in a single container, whatever that is.
So
And the sorting happens at a center that serves as a hub and sort of a hub and spoke system.
So I'm gonna go off script from here.
Yeah.
With that, okay? So I would say, back with the law originally, we put a law in place for all recycling. And then Casella invested millions in this to do this. And then we changed the law. So Casella then ultimately all this money was wasted on them investing in this new law, because suddenly we're going to take a bunch of products out of their stream that they invested in. It's going to be hard for other people to say, okay, let's invest millions on something further down the road with different people in office could suddenly change that. That can be a hard thing. I'm just saying something to consider.
Yeah.
And where they're already developing a single stream, and the wholesalers have said since the beginning, and when we've spoken with this, we would be more than happy to invest and work with Casella to expand on what they're doing and make it better. Given the opportunity to come up with that and work, because they're already on the right path. Any of you that have used their single stream know it's pretty convenient and easy to use. Exploring that, I'd love the opportunity to do that. And I know all the wholesalers will.
Thank you, Chair Bray. I think the difficulty we're having with the single stream is that we've seen information that shows that it's not getting its highest and best use at the same rate when it's single stream recycling versus through a redemption facility. So I really appreciate you coming and testifying to us, but I think what at least I'm trying to weigh, I'll speak for myself, is that we're just not getting as much good out of the system as it stands right now.
Okay.
So I'm trying to weigh kind of the business profit loss that we'll potentially see for those organizations and yourself is kind of what I'm hearing, compared to the overall community good of things being processed better.
Okay.
So that
actually comes further in my.
Yeah, I was
notes.
gonna ask, you have a really good, I appreciate how detailed you've been with your testimony. And the one thing that I was kind of focusing in on was we've had the back and forth of keep wine in, take wine out, and there's lots of different perspectives on it. And you do call out that you'd like us to take wine out of the bill.
Yes.
We currently have wine in the bill. So perhaps you would expound on that one, if don't
Sure.
rush you in your testimony.
No, I'm fine with jumping around. So with that is that our redemption centers are currently dealing with for the most part, lightweight products, meaning that the whole community has gone away from our glass sales have been dropping steadily. Green Deeply can definitely back that up easily for you, and you can see where consumers prefer aluminum. So everything's been moving to aluminum, which is much easier for redemption centers to deal with, to bring in. And if you look at this other company called Clink in their advertisements, you'll see a person throwing their empties into this container, and they show in their full program glass, but they don't show any glass in any of their commercials of somebody throwing it in, because it's very, very heavy and very, very difficult to carry. Now, I would challenge you to go home and take a regular trash bag that you have, just fill it even half full, and then pick it up when it's full of just wine bottles. Find out what happens. Smash.
Believe it or not, I do that.
Yeah, so do no longer drink. So I'm very aware of that situation.
Yeah, so, currently my wine bottles, I put them all in there, or all my glass actually in a bin, and I still, even though I can go single stored, I still separate out plastic with glass.
So, okay, so
But anyway.
I guess I hear what you're saying. And can I just ask one other piece with your research that you did with Maine? So something that the chair had expressed that I had not fully understood was that in Maine right now, they're doing over 500 sorts? Yeah, and we're down to 120 or so.
Right.
And my understanding with this bill is ideally we would get even fewer sorts. So I feel like with the commingling agreements and the points that the chair brought up earlier. So I appreciate the research you've done in Maine. I actually think it is a little dissimilar based on they have to do 500 sorts at these locations compared to much lower what we're experiencing now, and ideally fewer with the bill. So I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit to that if it came up.
It's about the redemption centers and their inability to handle, when you can't double anybody's business overnight. It takes more space, where putting plastic bottles and things like that, they're light, you can throw bags. It's not a difficult thing to do. When you're talking about the bulk and the heaviness of the glass bottles, that is going to be very challenging for redemption centers. It's going to be very challenging for consumers to deal with that and trying to stand in line when now it's already inconvenient to stand in line at redemption center and return things. And now you're going to have these big, heavy things to then have to drag through. And the other thing, and this is a really big thing that I don't think that people are even considering. I don't even think the redemption centers realize this. You have just made the market in Vermont so much bigger with redemption centers that you're now going to be inviting in out-of-state companies like Clink to come here and do business. And where it may seem like, well, that's fine, that's commerce, competition, that's what it's all about. Well, Clink comes in and they are manless. They're metal containers, and you go up and there's a computer system on them, and you get a UPC code, you slap it on your bag, you throw the bag in the container, and then they get to it and count it, and it shows up in your account. Seems very efficient, seems very great. But what it has done is put a lot of redemption centers out of business. And those redemption centers are all Vermont-owned redemption centers, Vermont people working at them. A lot of our stores depend on these empties to stay in business. And they frankly can't compete with all of these expensive things. What it is, as it was on the last time I was here, we had redemption centers, and there was only one redemption center in this whole state. Not even Beverage Warehouse has this, and had the equipment to crush down the empties and make his space more efficient, because the cost of this equipment was like $120,000 or $150,000.
Yeah, so up in Morrisville, Beverage.
Yes, yeah. So it may seem great, but when you bring in this much volume and you bring in out of state, now all that money that goes to Clink goes out of Vermont. It does not stay here with business owners in Vermont paying taxes. It's your idea of furthering the redemption is great and trying to keep Vermont cleaner. But I think, in any business, if you just go from here to here, you go the full distance on it, you're biting off more than what the people can handle, and it's setting the community up for failure versus saying, okay, let's just add this much more redemption to it. Let them get used to that, see how it works. And my gut feeling is that, it's going to be a little rough even then at first, but they'll be able to manage it because it's lighter material. And then with your glass all being channeled through Casella, they're gonna learn how to handle all of that. And they're gonna have all the glass, including your pickle jars and everything else that are gonna go there. And with that other stuff not being in their stream, they're gonna be focused on this. So there's gonna be left, and you're separating out things, and each side is gonna get more efficient. But if you're throwing too much in at one time, it's a recipe for failure. And the public, at first, they're gonna say, wow, this is great what Vermont's doing. But then when they get inconvenienced, they can turn on you. And you can take a great idea and turn it into a not great idea.
Well, implementation will be crucial, and public education and outreach. We changed the way that people carry food and all sorts of other things out of every state, every store in the state, when we said no more single-use plastic bags. We need, use reusable bags at the grocery store. And the lead-in was a year and a half of education and outreach. All sorts of organizations pitched in to help spread the word, make reusable bags available, and the transition was very smooth. So,
But
I'm hoping that we will learn from that example and find ways to do it.
it was smooth, but it definitely, there was still an alternative. If I forgot my bag, I could still purchase another bag.
Right.
So you left other doors open. That was a very good law. And in fact, I don't know anybody who doesn't keep a bag in their car now. But anyway, it's a big difference when you're talking about the weight of your groceries. Was always the weight of your groceries. And it always was simple just to go to your car, regardless of the bag. But now you're literally talking about doubling the amount of times that you might have to go to a redemption center. You're also taking the money of the people. And when a state where the taxes are, amongst the highest in the country, and you're making these simple pleasures of people. I hear the term struggling Vermonters all the time. And we're taking, the beverage system is a very affordable outlet for people to relax, which people need that, or else you have more crime. And if you were to buy a 12-pack of Coors Light in Vermont and you go to buy it in New Hampshire because you live on the border, it's $2 a case more expensive because of all the levels of taxes that are already on it. And now you can call deposits not a tax, but it is a tax because you want to take the unclaimed money, and that's a revenue stream for you. And a lot of people don't get that far in their thinking. I get it, but it is what it is. You collected all the money from the beer, the soda on that, which is what we use to help develop our system and to offset our cost with TOMRA. We don't have that anymore. And with the changes that you're going to be doing, if you do these, particularly, we definitely need that sheet money for a minimum of 5 years. There are millions of wine bottles out there right now that have no deposits. Redemption centers are not going to take the time to check every bottle. You're going to have all these people with so much more recycling. It's just going to be throw it in. And all these bottles never paid deposits. Wine is a collectible item. People have 10 years worth of wine sitting down in their cellars. Restaurants, Twin Farms has 50 years worth of wine in their cellar. No deposits on these. Another thing with a company like Klein, where they've gotten so much power in the state of Maine, they're actually trying to change the law that no wine can be sold in the state of Maine that doesn't have a UPC. Because if it doesn't have a UPC, it can't go through their system. So the customers don't actually get credit for their deposit that they paid on that wine. And with that eliminates, again, competition. What if a lot of wines that are sold in the state of Vermont don't have UPC codes? In changing things, Vermont has one of the largest selections of wine of any state in the country because of the way the laws are here. That again could change. Sure.
I think over time,
Yep.
we're definitely not fans of having bottles getting stickered. That we're looking, if that's part of the whole project, product registration, UPC codes, scannable codes. People have also suggested being a little more modern than that and including a QR code. So more to learn between here and the finish line. And the PRO would be working through all these sorts of technical details. I'm not saying, we're dodging something. We're trying to specify as much as we need to to be productive and put guardrails on our program. But we also know that we will learn by doing, and the PRO has an obligation actually to improve performance over time. So I'm not disagreeing with anything you're saying. I'm just
Hey,
saying.
you're listening, and that's all I appreciate
It's
that.
good to hear this because it makes us more aware of the challenges the program will face. Yeah. Anyway.
Thank you, Chair Bray, and I believe you're our last witness for the day, so,
You
okay, so I can ask questions and not feel guilty about holding someone else up. So the point that you're making around like the weight of the bags and people bringing things in, I want to dig a little bit deeper on that, because now you're just putting them in your recycling bin and taking them out the curb, or if you're like many Vermonters or most Vermonters, you are taking it to a recycling center.
Yes.
So I'm wondering why the weight factor is not seeming to deter people in recycling, but the case you're making is it would for the redemption center.
So with the redemption center, I show up with my plastic Tupperware bin
Which is what I do when I go to the recycling center too.
full of just wine bottles, not my pickles and all of that, because I just have to deposit. But just my wine bottles. So I just dump my thing of bottles
Yeah.
on the thing. So now the beverage baron, just picking a name out
Sure.
of my head, okay? All the glass goes into these big, I can't think of the name for
Like a
them.
big crate kind of thing?
Yeah, it's a big
Gaylord.
Gaylords, thank you. It all goes into
Wow,
the
okay.
Gaylords.
I have no idea what that is.
And then they just go in there, and then when they get filled up to a certain point, they can consider that to be so many dollars.
Yep.
And then they store it. But I don't know of any redemption centers that have forklifts that could lift these and then stack them. Forklifts are expensive. And so the amount of space that is going to take up, and that goes back to where the redemption centers don't have the space.
Okay, yeah,
And because of the weight, unlike their aluminum empties, they just take the bags and they throw them in a pile, or they throw them up overhead, where with this glass, they can't do that.
okay, so that is helpful clarification, because the way I first heard your point was that the individual like bringing the items would be the person most disadvantaged. And I was trying to get a sense of that, because right now, folks like myself, if I'm bringing recyclables, I'm still carrying a recyclables. It's just
Right.
what stop do I get off on? And it used to be in Hartford, we had a redemption center. Sadly, we do not, in our recycling facility that was managed separately. And that was a dream.
That it was. So let me expand further. So when you go to the beverage baron, if there is 10 customers, which easily on a Saturday or a Friday is that situation.
Yeah.
And so when you have your bags of aluminum and a little bit of bottles, of course, there's some always in there, but they're light enough so you can pick them up. And so you stand in line, you slowly move through the line. Where with wine, chances are you're not going to have a wine box. It's going to be in a Tupperware container. That is going to be harder to keep sliding down with while you're standing in line and to get it. So when I go to Casella's facility up by the Berrytown School, when there happens to be a group of people there, I don't take anything out of my truck. I just leave it there. And then when it's my turn to go up, I pick it up out of my truck.
Yeah.
I walk right over and I get rid of it. So I'm not having to move it in line with people. So it makes it very convenient and very easy and very fast to get rid of all of my recycling.
Oh, I see. Okay. Well, I think that's an interesting point. It doesn't eclipse kind of the general goals I think I have for the bill, but it is an important thing to think about the expediency and how people are actually experiencing their redemption center as a task that they have to do on a Saturday.
Right. And remember,
Yeah.
when you're giving them twice as many items to count, it's gonna take them twice as long to do it.
Well, that's actually, I don't agree with that, because we have heard around the commingling piece that we would actually have fewer sorts with this bill than more. So I think that that's a slight point of disagreement. But I did have one other question I wanted to ask you since we have you here. So in reviewing the bill on page 26, we look closely,
Mhm.
and this is a point Senator Bray brought up earlier, with the timeline of the bill being implemented in 2027, really going into effect. So we got some time, and I appreciated, I think it was your 12th point, or you had a point around the timing. Oh, it was 12. Yeah, every business owner knows change quickly and badly. and I respect that point. But we do have the bill going into effect in 2027. And then I wanted to ask specifically for you, how you felt about the language when it came to, on page 26, 1 and 2, which describes that we would estimate the total system costs and savings associated with implementing and expanding the beverage container redemption system under this. So I'm wondering if you feel that that responds to some of your concerns, because we don't have those numbers yet, and that's actually in the bill, as we would
So
understand.
our
those.
cost to do it,
So we have a few different sections. I don't know if you had a chance to review the bill before coming today with section 7, and it's the systems analysis piece,
okay,
which I'm happy. This part I feel really does address a lot of the concerns that you've highlighted, which is the 1 star. Trying to look at that cost analysis as we go about even implementing it.
well, I don't know that, so with this, and I've mentioned this the first time, I don't think that there's as many bottles not making it into the system as you think. As far as, like when you drive down the road, you see
Twisted Tea.
yeah, you see the boxes, you see, yes. When was the last time you drove, saw a wine bottle on the side of the road?
Well, we do see our wine bottle. I mean, I'll tell you on
It's-
Green Up
it's-
Day.
It's infrequent, it's not very many. But anyway,
But does this make you feel any more comfortable with it, knowing that we're really trying to take a systems approach and understand what the cost would be as we go along in the implementation?
I do understand that, but no, because and it's just because of talking with the people in Maine and how much it affected them. Like I said, I know how much it's gonna affect me, and it's gonna be extremely difficult, because right now as our company, to be efficient, my family, we run every single top position in the company, because if I had to pay somebody to do my job, we couldn't do it. Just because to being a small distributor, it is very difficult. But anyway, I know that that's not your problem.
No,
But if having to hire, it definitely would cost extra people to have to sticker all of these bottles of wine. One of the things that I do have here, I don't have enough pictures to show everybody, but we can at least do this. And I can explain this very quickly. So in one picture, you see a long box, which is like this, and the wine bottles are laid in like this, and then another layer on top. That's how the 12 bottles is. Just to sticker those bottles, I have to unpack the whole case because of the way they're in there. The Italians, their cases are like this, square, and then they lay them down 3 bottles 4 deep. So then you have to dig down like this. That is very, very difficult. It can be dangerous in the way of packing that, unpacking it, bottles breaking. The people in America, we do our bottles like this. That is no problem. You can sticker a case like that in seconds. These other ones, it's minutes, and it's dangerous.
Thank you for that.
Turn it down. This is just a curious question. The bottoms of bottles have the hollow part in them.
Yeah,
And I always thought that was to help stacking of bottles so that they didn't tip it, whatever. And others say it's to cut down on the volume so they don't have to play it.
It's to gather.
What's your opinion?
it's like this gentleman said,
Pardon?
the residue. The sulfites, so they will gather all collectively in one place at the bottom of the bottle.
Ring around the outside.
And
Right.
it's not the only, it does add weight to the bottom. That is true, so it's less tippy. Yeah.
Thank you.
I wish we were starting this system from scratch. Because there are certain things that I think we certainly ought to be doing that we're not doing, and that the bill changing to doing that, it would be an improvement. But what we have now, there are some things that we leave to the private sector. If there's a profit to be made, then people have a reason to do it, and they provide the service. And the government's out of it, it's going to be taxing and so on. But that this is America, business does, okay? the business of America is to do business. So everything works fine. Or there's some things where it has to be done, but there's no profit, so the government does it. We have here a hybrid system in which a lot of this is a function of government. But private profit-seeking companies are embedded in that system. The system doesn't run without them. And it's looking to me like what the testimony we're getting now is that the bill is sort of a dirty trick on those people. That, you know, they're sort of like, we set up a system that involves companies. And the companies invested,
We didn't. The companies that sold the products had their own system. They drop off the bottles. When you returned them,
yeah.
you got back a deposit. And those companies decided they didn't want to do it anymore. They
They
would
made it trash.
throw it and they advertised no deposit, no return, spent millions to unload the system that they had invented onto the public. Whether it was through littering, throwing it over the bank, that's what they made a conscious decision to say, we're no longer going to take care of our
Or
containers.
the taxpayers
We will-
provide a landfill.
And the taxpayers don't have to do anything. They could just leave those on the side of the road, in the streams, in the brooks.
That's how I use the word or.
So, and the system that we are looking to modify was started from scratch.
Yeah.
And when you start things from scratch, you make changes. And often government pays for and does it, or the private sector is given some rules on which they can operate and make a profit. That's what we do. If we were starting from scratch, we'd probably come up with soda and beer and we charge a nickel deposit.
Or 34 cents.
Yeah.
Based on the inflation.
Now it's 34 cents and we have, for some reason, decided we weren't gonna.
Or we could have told the producers right at the beginning, like your town of Randolph tried to do with batteries. You tell them your product, your profit, your problem. Take care of your batteries, take care of your other. And we would have just said to the wine companies and to the big, just take your
Big
bottles
government
back.
regulation.
And we know it works because all of those of us of a certain age grew up in a world where that's what was done with our milk bottles anymore.
That's big government strangling regulation. You have to do it this way.
I don't know if I need to go on a road trip with you guys.
I know.
But
The
I do
music would be
want to
great,
say
though.
that I did mention at the beginning that, so, wine, we do sell it, we do make a profit, we do, but at no point did I want to make sure that you realize that we are willing to be part of the solution,
Oh,
just not as a deposit. There is another way. Give us a chance to work with Casella. We're willing to invest in finding that way and helping make it work. So then you can take care of all glass, not just wine bottles. Wine is a small part of the problem. There's a bigger problem. We'd rather be a part of fixing the whole thing than just saying, let's just do this little part and let us work together and, we focus on
So
something.
why has the industry that wants to work together to come up with an industry-based solution not come up with one? Why do they only show up when government says enough? It's been 3 decades and you haven't dealt with wine yet.
But Casella has been working with it. I bring all my wine bottles to them with their single stream. They're developing a system. So that is not true. A system has been being developed by Casella with not me in particular. You're right, not me in particular, but companies outside of me have been developing technologies and buying equipment, investing in Vermont's recycling program. Casella's been doing this for all of the things that you're talking about adding to the bottle bill. So
I don't know if it will be, I'm sorry.
And we, had a system that had standardized sizes and shapes of products which has been dismantled by the private sector to compete with one another for sales,
Mhm.
which has rendered the processing, and the problem with bottles to be much more complex.
But isn't that true of every sector of business? They make cars look different, they make everything look different to try to sell their products.
Yes. And we, the last thing we discussed,
I
And we
really
have an
appreciate having all this
inspection
conversation.
system,
Thank
an
you.
inspection system that all cars have to pass.
Yeah, we get a
in
lot of
order
regulations.
To be on the
cars.
road, but we don't say, you can inspect your own car, we
Hmm.
trust you.
The analogy is getting strained.
Yeah.
We talked transportation earlier, so now it's just.
One piece of good news, I think, in the picture here, I'm noticing that this bottle has both a barcode and a QR code. So there will be no stickering or something like that, that it would scan.
Mhm. For some suppliers, but again, like I mentioned at the beginning of the document that I gave you, up in Maine, only 30% of the suppliers have complied, and none of them are imports for the most part. In the way that at least the products that I deal with, because they're small suppliers, take my number one selling Puy Fusset. It's a French Chardonnay, and Chevaux is my largest one. I only buy 200 cases a year of Chevaux. It's expensive. It's $50 a bottle. And they're not going to change. They sell 50,000 cases a year. They're not going to change their labeling for Vermont. So that's where all of my business, 802, Artisanal, Beer Shepherd, Vermont Wine Merchants, that's what we specialize in, because that's how I try to compete with Baker and Farrell. I mean, they're the gorilla, and this is how, we all try to make a living, is on these smaller things. Again, that's my problem, but it just makes it harder for the smaller guys to compete.
So I'm just curious, since you end up seeing a lot of wine from Europe, are you seeing QR codes or some European coding system for ownership of the container?
Oh, it has nothing, the QR codes have nothing to do with that. If you scan that QR code, you're gonna get information about the winery. It's a marketing,
Right.
that's what they're used for.
Right. Oh, thank you for that. I didn't speak very clearly. So there's a proposal. Some people have been urging us to consider adding a QR code that is scannable for the redemption system,
Mhm.
instead of just relying on a barcode. But, so you see much in the way of barcodes, which I guess is a skew, right?
Yes, you're gonna have a better chance of getting suppliers to do a barcode than you are a QR code. Just because it's such a standard of business for grocery stores, they don't scan QR codes, they scan barcodes.
Yeah.
And
And that's in the bill. I mean, part of there's a whole section on product registration. If you want to sell, you need to have a barcode.
yeah,
How the world outside of Vermont, particularly overseas, will look at that requirement? It's an interesting question. I don't know the answer to that. More to learn. There's always more to learn.
there is, right off the bat, I'm just guessing, and so I'm gonna go very conservative. You would be eliminating 10% of products that would not be sold anymore. So you can't get your favorite food to say, or people just order it through the mail. And then they're getting it and they're not paying a deposit, and then it ends up in our commingling system. And so it could lead very much to mucking up the system that we're talking about creating.
Right. Well, thank you for your well-informed, challenging, thoughtful testimony.
Thank you. It was a pleasure talking to you.
Thanks for coming in.
I
Thank
want
you.
to talk to you about a gorilla container when you're done. I'm
Are
serious.
we going outside? I'm waiting.